Hello, Dennis. Today I'm talking to Dennis. Thank you very much for joining me today, especially in a stressful time in lockdown. First of all, let us know who you are and what you are currently doing during these days, these very
Um,
strange days.
Thank you for having me here, Anna. I'm Dennis Relojo-Howell. It should be a lot easier for you to pronounce because it's a Portuguese surname. I'll just give you a bit of trajectory in my life. I'm originally from the Philippines,
Mm-hmm.
and then I came here in the UK in 2013 to do my master's degree, and since then I've lived here. And a year after I came here in the UK, I launched a website called Psychreg. Essentially, this is a website which publishes all things psychology, mental health, and well-being. And then I later on expanded it to have a podcast and have an open access journal. So basically, that's what I do. And then more recently, I also started to, pretty much like what you're doing, Anna, I started to have a YouTube channel where I interview people within the same genre.
And
So
you're
that's what I
doing an
do.
amazing job for such
Thank
a long
you.
time. It's real. Dennis, now we're talking about something else. How do you feel about experiencing this epidemic in the place where you're living? Where are you living in now?
I live in East London. The funny thing is that because usually this time of year I go to Philippines and visit my family. So this epidemic has really impacted my
Your life.
holiday. Yeah, my
Mm.
holiday because I'm supposed to fly to Philippines for my dad's birthday. He's already 62. So obviously I have to postpone that. So I'll end up going in Philippines in November. But um,
Mm-hmm.
career-wise, it hasn't impacted me compared with other people because I work from home. My main source of income is my website, so it does not really affect me. But in terms of the social aspect, it has a huge impact because even though I work from home, I do meet my friends in London weekly. So it's kind of, it has become quite isolated and lonely. And of course, yeah,
Mm.
I suppose everyone is also in the same situation. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's how it has impacted me.
Yeah, thank you. Do you feel that there are any concern in relation to mental health in the population? I mean, are any specific measures being taken, especially among the main risk groups that you know? Do
Mhm.
you think the work is
That's
being
a
done?
that's a very interesting question because since the advent of coronavirus and of course the lockdown, what happened is that we tend to focus more on the symptoms of coronavirus, and of course, rightly, that should be the right approach in light of the current crisis. But what tended to happen as well is that because I work within the mental health sector, so
Mm-hmm.
that tends to be where I focus my attention.
Yes.
And what seems to happen now is we seem to be forgetting people who've got anxiety problems, who are victims of domestic abuse, and these people who've got suicidal ideation, and they seem to be no longer being talked about because we tend to focus more on people with symptoms of coronavirus. And I suppose it's not only about people who've got mental health issues. We've also got concerns for people who've got cancer, for people who've got diabetes, for people who have hypertension and stroke. They
Mm-hmm.
seem to be not the priority. Of course, I'm not so sure about that because I don't work within the healthcare sector.
Yes, of
But
course.
as a member of the general public,
Uh-huh.
that's how I see it. Everything has been completely, shall we say, receiving less attention than they normally would because of this pandemic.
And this is a big and huge difference, isn't it?
Yes,
That
especially if you're really struggling with your mental health and you find being isolated, and especially if you live alone, this just kinds of aggravates your situation.
uh-huh. Without obviously wanting to make projections, in your opinion, what do you think this pandemic can change in terms of people's behavior in society? And I don't mean only the alcoholics and the dependencies or people who have addictions, but in general.
I think it will make us a bit more conscious of our health. It makes us a bit more paranoid that am I going to catch disease? Am I going to get infected by germs, by virus? You tend to be more worried. And just earlier, I was talking to my husband about this, and he said he doesn't really believe that after after we've relaxed the lockdown that we're going to have a normal life that will carry on as normal, because there will be
sorry, I'm sorry, does he think that people will forget this very soon?
no, yeah, that's what he's saying. He said we're not going to have a normal life. We're going to have a hangover with this pandemic for such a long time. We will keep on talking about it, and this will always be at the back of our mind. And it will take time for us to recover physically, socially, and of course economically. But on another point, I think this will make us more appreciative of freedom. I tend to look at it that way, because before we tend to take for granted, yeah, the freedom, the ability that we can just go out and get something on the grocery without having to queue. But now, just being able to get a half a dozen of egg is already a struggle. Getting a pint of milk, that's already, you have to queue up for that for 3 hours. And in my life, I never thought that I would have to experience that. And it's even more difficult for me because I don't drive. So imagine with, if I have to go to a grocery and there's a long queue, I have to go to another grocery. It's too much for me as a non-driver. But I think after this lockdown, I will be more appreciative of, like what I've said, freedom and the ability to do just simple tasks.
Yeah, I can relate with that. I don't drive also. I have a license, but I don't drive. So then it's just one another question to make not this last too much. What is your biggest fear or concern at this time when we have no idea when this will end? Can you make?
It's interesting because my biggest concern is not really so much on the mental health side, because I always believe in the resilience within every people. I know that there's an inherent ability for us to bounce back. It may not be inherent for most people, for all people, but I believe that for all people, they always want to bounce back. But my biggest concern is the economic impact, because I know a lot of people, they're already hanging on to their job, and especially for those people who are working for small companies, I don't know how they will recover. And that is still intimately intertwined with mental health, because everything, the baseline of everything is economics. If we're not sure about our income, we're not sure about our job security, that will impact us. There was an interesting article that I've read. Unfortunately, I can't remember the publication, but they said during the recession, there's more cases of suicide. And that's my biggest concern, because after this, we will surely be in economic, in a bad economic situation. And that will trigger a lot of mental health issues, so much more in other countries, especially developing countries, which doesn't have a stronger economic landscape, that will really have a massive impact on them. Because bear in mind that this is the first time, I think, on a global scale that we've locked down everything. And we live in a global world, so everything is interconnected in relation to economics. So I'm just worried for people losing their job.
Yeah, and maybe this is the problem. So the next question before the arts and culture ones, I'd like you I would like to listen to your thoughts about, is this COVID-19 a cause in itself or a consequence of something greater that we are not still talking about and should be?
I think I've got a different take on that. I'm not one of those people who actually deny coronavirus. I do understand that there is really a real threat when it comes to coronavirus, but I'd like to mention some names here, and I've actually listed this name. There's two German doctors called Wolfgang Wardag, and there's another one, Dr. Sucharit Vadki, and they are they work within the healthcare sector in Germany, and they kind of express their uncertainty. They kind of express their doubts about coronavirus being as serious as a threat, like what the mainstream media are portraying it. And here in the UK, I'd like to mention three names. There's one who is a vocal voice here in the UK. It's Peter Hitchens. He doesn't have a medical background, but his argument is more hinged into politics and the economic consequences of the lockdown. And there's Dr. John Lee and Dr. Mark Pemberton. Essentially, what these people are saying is that the way that most of the governments are treating coronavirus and the lockdown, is it really a balanced approach? Is it really a proportionate approach? Because bear in mind that when we impose a lockdown, it's not only economic that the economy that's going to suffer, but ultimately it's still going to affect us socially, it's going to affect us mentally. And that's, I think, one of the things that a lot of countries do not try to consider. I'm quite ambivalent in, you know, what's the best way to deal with coronavirus. But I just want to point out some interesting cases. Let's say, for example, Sweden. They did not impose a similar measure, just like what here in the UK and in Portugal and in other countries have done, and also Japan. They did not impose it, and I don't seem to see a really different trend, a drastic difference between Sweden and the UK, Japan, and the rest of the country. But then again, I don't profess to be an expert. I don't have a background in epidemiology or virology. It's just an interesting thing to consider when we're talking about the consequences of lockdown and coronavirus.
No, I was just asking your opinion, of course. We are not doctors ourselves. Dennis, just to finish our talk here, please let us know what I got talking about culture. What are you reading, listening to? What are helping with books or something you want to share with us?
I've just finished a book called The Autumn Diary. So it's the diary of he's a playwright during the 60s, and he was murdered by his boyfriend. It's interesting to read that because it's a diary during the 1967. And I'm reading another book which is quite controversial. It's called Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. He was issued a fatwa for writing this novel because a lot of people in Muslim countries, they say this is quite blasphemous.
Yes, we know.
Yeah, Satanic Verses. So I don't usually just focus on anything about mental health. I tend to have I tend to read something about culture. I tend to read something about politics. But interestingly, just 3 days ago, my friend from New York sent me 3 books about mental health, and I'm so appreciative of that.
And what are you listening to?
I don't really listen to the radio for music. But I do listen to podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
You listen to podcasts, Dennis? Tell me you're not listening to any music at all? You have no music in your life?
No, I'm not a music person. I always tend to have a podcast in the background when I'm working. I suppose it's still a bit related to culture. I don't know if you're familiar with the magazine Spectator. So they do publish a range of articles about culture, about politics, about lifestyle. And I listen to their podcasts. I also listen to Unheard, UNHERD. They do have interesting podcasts. And trigonometry also. I listen to trigonometry.
Trigonometry. Okay, that's right. That is. Okay, so thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Chatting with you was just wonderful. I was very, very pleased to meet you face to face.
Thank you.
Finally.
Thank you.
Bye. All the best for you. Stay safe.
Bye, and all the best to your work. Good luck with, I know you're organizing series of mental health events. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Maybe we work together someday. We never know.
I hope so. Thank
Hope
you.
so too, Dennis. Bye. Stay safe.
Take care. Stay healthy.